Every time you explain yourself, you're giving away power without even realizing it. Not because you're wrong, not because you're weak, but because you're speaking like someone seeking forgiveness, not like someone who commands. You may not see it, but the moment you start justifying your choices, you've already stepped down from the throne. You're no longer the one making decisions. You're the one asking for permission to make them. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He didn't write to help you be liked. He wrote so you could survive, so you could dominate without apology. I used to think like you. I believed that if I was honest, people would trust me, that if I explained myself clearly, they'd stand with me. But the more I explained, the more they dissected. What I thought was connection was strategy for them. What I believed was trust became a manual on how to break me. I handed them the blueprint, and they turned it into a weapon. Words aren't always connection. Sometimes they are slow self-destruction. You think you're leading, but really, you're pleading to be understood. Here's the truth. You don't need to be understood. You need to be felt. You need to walk into a room and shift the atmosphere without saying a word. Not because you're performing power, but because you've stopped performing entirely. Let them guess. Let them worry. Let them sit in silence, waiting for a voice that never arrives. The most powerful man in the room isn't the one who speaks the most. It's the one who makes people hold their breath waiting for a sentence. If you've ever lost yourself trying to justify who you are, if you've ever explained your worth only to be ignored, now is the time to stop. No more defending. No more apologizing. From this moment on, let silence become your language. Let presence be your declaration. If this message stirred something in you, if it woke up the part of you that's tired of being overlooked, drop a comment below. I don't explain myself anymore. And if you're ready to explore the art of silent control, as Machiavelli once outlined it, hit that subscribe button. Not because we need you, but because maybe, just maybe, you've realized it's time to need yourself. The moment you crave to be understood, you hand your enemy the blueprint. It doesn't feel like weakness. It feels noble, honest, human. You explain to build trust, to show transparency, to be real, but every word becomes a foothold, a clue, a crack in your armor they didn't earn but now possess. I learned that the hard way. In meetings, I spoke with clarity. In relationships, I offered reasons. In doubt, I opened up, and I bled for it. Because no one preserves what you reveal. They analyze it. They interpret it. They weaponize it. The more I spoke, the more predictable I became. The more I shared, the easier I was to dismantle. They didn't respect my honesty. They studied it. They mapped it. And they moved accordingly. Machiavelli warned us. He who reveals himself is no longer feared, only analyzed, and eventually replaced. You don't need to be understood. You need to be effective. You need to be felt without being dissected. Think of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. He didn't explain it. He didn't gather consensus. He moved, and Rome adjusted. That's power. It doesn't ask for agreement. It forces recalibration. Look around. Politics, business, relationships. The ones who explain too much always fall first. But the ones who let silence speak, they become legends. Because unpredictability builds fear, and fear lasts longer than love. Love fadis. Fear remembers. Want to be respected? Then stop narrating every move. Let your decisions echo without commentary. Let your actions speak languages no words can reach. Steve Jobs didn't list 10 reasons why the iPhone would change the world. He walked on stage. He said one sentence. He held up one object. And the room forgot how to breathe. That's presence. That's power. Not pleading to be understood, but daring to be undeniable. From this moment on, burn the habit of over-explaining. Let your boundaries stand without apology. Let your absence speak more than your presence ever did. Let your silence become tension. Let them lean in. Let them wonder. Let them realize they don't know you anymore, and that's why they can't control you. If this message struck a chord, if some part of you whispered, "That's me," then write it below. I choose presence over explanation. And if you believe content like this matters, that it shifts the way men carry themselves, you can now support this mission through a super thank. It's not about charity. It's about signal, telling the algorithm, we don't play safe. We speak truth to those who've already supported. Thank you. You didn't just click a button, you fortified the message. And if you're still watching this, you're not just here to consume content. You're here because you felt it too. That ache to explain yourself is now becoming a calm refusal to be decoded. You've stopped performing. You've started shifting. Now, let's keep building. The less they know about your next move, the more they fear it. Let that sink in. Because in this game, fear is not built on facts. It's built on uncertainty, on ambiguity, on the simple, unnerving truth that you might do anything, and they have no way of predicting what. You want control. You don't get it by explaining. You get it by disappearing behind the veil of silence and letting their imaginations do the work for you. When people can't read you, they start creating stories about you. And those stories, they're always more extreme than the reality. They begin whispering, speculating, projecting their fears onto your stillness. And suddenly, you become bigger than life. Not because you spoke louder, but because you stopped speaking entirely. Machiavelli understood this principle perfectly. In The Prince, he warned rulers, a man who is feared because of uncertainty is more powerful than one loved for his transparency. Love fades, but fear born of the unknown, it lingers. When you're too easy to read, they get comfortable. They predict you. And once they predict you, they start planning around you. Eventually, they start replacing you. I learned this the hard way. I used to fill every silence with words, thinking I was being clear, thinking I was being open. What I was really doing was making myself disposable. My transparency became their advantage. They anticipated my next step before I even made it. They grew bold, confident, and I became a fixture, not a force. But then I did something radical. I stopped. I didn't rage. I didn't disappear out of weakness. I became still. I let silence become my new posture. At first, it was uncomfortable. Silence feels heavy when you're used to proving yourself. It feels unnatural when you've been taught that leadership must be loud. But silence is how the room begins to lean toward you. They start wondering. They start watching. And with every moment that you withhold, you shift the frame. Because ambiguity is chaos. And in chaos, the one who controls the frame controls the game. You see, when people don't know your intent, they start preparing for the worst. They overcompensate. They become paranoid. And in that spiral of doubt, you gain leverage without even lifting a finger. Suddenly, they're not just reacting to what you said. They're reacting to what you might do. They hold back. They hesitate. They talk among themselves while you remain unmoved. And that stillness, that becomes your throne. Because the one who controls the tension of silence is the one who controls the outcome. In the corporate world, I've watched leaders who barely spoke, and yet entire departments bent around their energy. Why? Because unpredictability breeds caution, and caution breeds control. People don't challenge what they don't understand. They prepare for it. They adjust to it. And in that adjustment, they obey. When you speak less, you force the world to fill in the blanks. And the blanks are always more intimidating than the truth. In military strategy, this is called asymmetry. You never meet the enemy where they expect you. You never attack in the way they've prepared for. You use silence, misdirection, stillness until the opposition collapses under its own assumptions. Think of water. It doesn't break the stone by force. It erodes it by being patient, by being consistent, by refusing to reveal its shape until it reshapes everything around it. That's how you move. That's how you lead. With restraint, with presence, with the kind of calm that feels like a storm about to break. And when you finally speak, it's not conversation, it's consequence. So stop giving them the map. Stop narrating every choice, every move, every thought. Let them guess. Let them burn energy trying to interpret shadows, while you remain focused, clear, and untouched. In a world addicted to noise, to be the one who makes silence terrifying. If this idea resonates with you, if you felt the power of withholding, but haven't yet dared to own it, write in the comments. Let them guess. And if you're starting to understand that Machiavellian control doesn't require volume, but precision and presence, then subscribe now. Not to follow noise, but to master the silence that commands everything. Every time you explain yourself, you step off the throne and onto the witness stand. You may not notice it at first. It starts small. A sentence here, a quick clarification there. You think you're being reasonable, transparent. You think you're building bridges, but you're not. You're handing out weapons. Each explanation is a chisel, and the more you speak, the more they carve away at the stone of your authority. Machiavelli warned, he who opens himself up for examination, invite dismantling. In the court of power, there are no fair judges. There are only opportunists, spectators, enemies wearing smiles, friends who haven't yet chosen sides. You give them a reason. They turn it into a condition. You give them context. They question your competence. Because once you explain yourself, you are no longer commanding. You are requesting. And here's the truth. Most men don't want to face requests. Do not move the world. Déclaration, do. In history, we don't remember the reasons. We remember the ruptures. Martin Luther didn't ask permission to nail his theses. He nailed them. No lengthy speech, no soft preamble, just a hammer, just impact. That's what makes legacies. And yet, so many of us, especially men, taught to be good, reasonable, understood, spend years in the fog of justification. You explain your decisions to your partner, hoping to be loved for your honesty. You explain your choices to your team, hoping to be seen as transparent. You explain your dreams to friends and family, hoping they'll validate them. And when they don't, when they doubt, when they tear your words apart, you feel betrayed. But you shouldn't. You didn't get betrayed. You gave them the rope. I've done it myself. I used to walk into meetings, armed with charts, footnotes, forecasts, thinking if I showed enough clarity, people would get behind me. Instead, they dissected me. They questioned every metric, every assumption, every motive. And they weren't trying to understand. They were trying to win. In that moment, I realized, you don't explain your power. You prove it by acting. A general doesn't justify a surprise attack. He lets the smoke explain it for him. He lets the ground they lost say everything that needs to be said. Words become daggers when they aim inward. And too often, we twist those daggers with our own hand. The moment you feel the urge to explain, ask yourself this: does this explanation strengthen my position, or does it defend my insecurity? Because that's the line. It's thin, it's dangerous, and it's where most men bleed. Imagine walking into a room and saying nothing, just looking, waiting, and then delivering one sentence. Just one, but it lands like a verdict, because your silence before it gave it weight. Your restraint gave it volume. Your presence made it law. That's what power sounds like. It doesn't beg to be understood. It doesn't fear being misinterpreted. It is willing to be misunderstood, because it knows the outcome will speak louder than any paragraph ever could. Do you think Napoleon explained why he crowned himself emperor? No, he placed the crown on his own head, not the Pope. That act was the explanation. A moment so bold, so clear. It silenced the room. It shut down any debate before it started. That's what you must learn. You don't explain your strategy. You deliver it. Let the result echo. Let your silence become the force field. Let your decisions be the weapons. Because when you explain too much, you hand them the instruction manual to dismantle you. Power is not built through articulation. It's built through consequence. You want to be respected. Then stop softening your edges for their approval. Berari. Be exact. Be silent when they expect speech, and thunder when they least expect sound. If someone asks, why did you do it this way? Pause. Look them in the eye. And if you must speak, say only this: watch. Because that one word spoken with conviction, spoken with restraint, spoken with silence behind it, will do more than any speech ever could. If this message resonates, write below, I lead with outcomes, not explanations. And if you're learning, write now, to lead, like Machiavelli taught, with restraint, presence, and silence, sharpened into strategy. Subscribe, not to be part of the noise, but to master the quiet that bends the room. If they ask why, don't answer. Let the aftermath speak for you. There's a level of power that doesn't just speak less. It refuses to explain, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. Because men who move history forward don't beg for alignment. They act, they shift the board, and the world adjusts. You can see it in their posture. No punits, no rush to be liked, no need to be understood. Only presence, only gravity. Explanations are cheap. Consequences are currency. Think of it like this: a lion doesn't justify the hunt. It doesn't issue warnings. It strikes. And the jungle adapts. Same with a storm. You don't ask the thunder what it meant. You board the windows. You respond to the force, not the dialogue. In the world of power, impact is the only language that counts. Not your intentions, not your rationales, just the echo of what you left behind. But here's where most men fall. They mistake visibility for strength. They narrate their thoughts in hopes of approval. They offer too much and lose everything. Each sentence, a piece of armor removed. Each justification, a piece of strategy exposed. And once they understand your reasoning, they'll reverse engineer your next move. Once they decode your pattern, they'll design a trap just for you. That's why history doesn't remember speeches. It remembers earthquakes. Genghis Khan didn't write memos. He moved, and continents realigned. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He invaded. That's the energy you carry. If your strategy needs to be explained before it's respected, it's not a strategy. It's a plea. So when you walk into the next room, into your next negotiation, your next confrontation, say less. Let the weight of your silence do the lifting. Let the tension build. Let the air shift. Let their imagination fill in the blanks. Because once people realize you don't explain, they start preparing differently. They speak softer. They observe closer. They hesitate. And in that hesitation, you control the room. Pause. Close your eyes just for a moment. Picture the last time you explained yourself, hoping they'd understand. Now imagine saying nothing and watching them adjust anyway. That's power. It's not for everyone. It takes restraint to stay silent while others perform. It takes precision to let the result, not the reason, speak. But that's what separates noise from dominance. And if this message resonates, if you feel the shift happening inside you, comment below. My results are my only explanation. And if you want to go further with this message, if you want to help us keep building this space without filters, sponsors, or compromise, you can now support the mission directly through a super thank. It helps keep this channel cinematic, psychological, and deeply unapologetic. And for those who've already supported, you didn't just donate. You told the world, this kind of content matters. That silence can be sharper than sound, and that some voices deserve to be felt, not just heard. So thank you for believing in this. And if you're still here, you're not watching for entertainment. You're watching because deep down, you're done explaining. You're ready to lead without permission. Let's continue. The moment they can predict your next move, they stop fearing it. That's the moment your presence becomes background noise. Not a command, not a mystery, just noise. In power, predictability is the beginning of irrelevance. Once they've mapped your steps, they stop watching. Once they understand your rhythm, they stop reacting. And when they stop reacting, you've already lost control. You see, familiarity doesn't build respect. It breeds complacency, and complacency is the death of influence. True power lives in mystery, in shadows, in the unanswered questions. Why do you think Putin rarely speaks publicly, but when he does, the world leans in? Why do military generals never publish their war strategies, only their victories? Why do the most dangerous CEOs like Bezos or Musk reveal just enough to feed the market, but never enough to be read? Because what you can't predict, you fear. That's the Machiavellian truth. When you're unreadable, they assume you know more than you do. They over-prepare. They over-calculate. They move around you like satellites around an unseen force. And suddenly, you're not a participant. You're the axis. This is how empires are built. Not by speeches, but by restraint. Think of Steve Jobs again. He didn't post a roadmap. He let the silence before a launch do the seduction. And when he dropped the iPhone, it felt like lightning cracking the sky. That's how you move. With silence, with gravity, with pattern-breaking presence that opens minds and shuts down opposition. In psychology, they call it pattern interruption. A break in expected behavior that disrupts defenses. It opens a window just wide enough for influence to take root. You say nothing. They guess everything. You disappear. They imagine you everywhere. That's real control. Not through intimidation, but through absence so intentional, it becomes pressure. But here's the danger. Most men are addicted to over-communication. They flood the room with explanations. They fear being misunderstood. So they narrate their every move. Here's why I left. Here's what I'm planning. Here's what I meant. And in doing so, they strip themselves bare. They kill the myth. And once the myth is gone, all that's left is a man hoping to be taken seriously. Don't be that man. Be the man they whisper about. The one who never says too much, who never reveals too early, who holds his cards so tight that the world assumes he's always holding aces. Because mystery builds myth, and myth builds loyalty far deeper than logic ever could. This isn't about deception. It's about discipline. The unreadable man doesn't need to lie. He simply refuses to explain. He doesn't justify the shift. He becomes the shift. So next time someone asks, "What are you planning?" Smile, pause, and say nothing. Let the silence answer for you. Let the discomfort do the speaking. Let your unpredictability command the room before a single word leaves your mouth. And if this silence speaks to you, if you feel it stirring something deeper, the urge to move differently, to lead with gravity, instead of noise, drop a comment below. I choose mystery over transparency. And if this message helps you reclaim your edge, and you want to support this channel creating deeper, sharper, cinematic content, you can say thank you with a super thanks. It tells the algorithm, we're not here to play safe. We're here to lead in silence. And to those who've already supported, you didn't just donate. You made this voice bolder, more unshakable. And for that, we thank you. Now go. Withdraw. Restrain. Move like something the world has no name for yet. Because power is what happens when silence becomes prophecy. When you stop explaining, people stop reacting. They start adapting. Let's get one thing straight. Power doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't perform. True power enters quietly and shifts everything around it. It is not loud. It is not boastful. It is the silence that rearranges the room. I used to believe the opposite. That presence meant visibility. That leadership was about showing up everywhere, saying everything, being available, being accessible. But the more visible I became, the more they overlooked me. The more I explained, the less they listened. The more I showed up, the less I was missed. Familiarity does not breed respect. It breeds predictability. And predictability kills presence. You become just another voice in the noise, another man in the crowd, until one day you realize you've normalized yourself into irrelevance. But when I withdrew, not in fear, in discipline, when I stopped responding to every message, stopped explaining every decision, stopped filling every silence with words, that's when the shift happened. They leaned in, they listened harder, they watched closer. The same words I once spoke that went ignored now felt like declarations. Why? Because they were rare. Because I didn't speak unless I had something to move. Because my silence had trained them to wait. And what is rare becomes sacred. This is the law of scarcity. Gold is valuable not because it's flashy, but because it's rare. When your voice becomes rare, your presence becomes valuable. When your attention becomes rare, your boundaries become law. Power is not in being everywhere. Power is in being missed when you're not. In the old Japanese courts, there was a phrase, "The emperor does not speak often, but when he does, it is as if the heavens have opened." Why? Because the emperor understood something we've forgotten in the modern world. That mystery elevates authority. That distance sharpens reverence. Your presence shouldn't be constant. It should be an event. Stop being predictable. Stop flooding the room with your thoughts. Let them wander. Let them feel the vacuum of your silence. Let them speculate about your intent. And then when you do speak, speak like it's the final word. Not as a plea, not as an explanation, but as a verdict. One sentence, measured, clear, unapologetic, and then silence again. Let it echo. You're not here to be followed because you're understood. You're here to be followed because you are felt, because your presence carries gravity. Not everyone will get it. Some will ask, "Why are you so quiet now?" Some will mistake it for arrogance. Let them. They don't need to understand. They only need to adjust. And they will. Because when someone enters a room with quiet certainty, everyone else becomes uncertain. That's the real shift. When others start calibrating around you, you are no longer part of the room. You are the center of it. So don't give them your words. Give them your weight. Don't be the noise. Be the gravity. And remember, in a world where everyone's trying to speak first, the most dangerous man is the one who waits. The one who speaks last and still wins. Comment below. I will be missed in my silence, not forgotten in my noise. And if you're learning that presence isn't about being louder, but about being heavier, hit subscribe. Because the rarest voice in the room is often the one that commands it. Real power doesn't knock. It doesn't ask. It enters, and everything rearranges itself around it. That's the final stage. Not to be respected, not to be liked, but to become inevitable, where your name alone changes behavior, where your silence creates more pressure than someone else's shouting, where your next move is feared before it's even made. You don't achieve that by talking more. You don't get there by being available. You get there by delivering. Consistently, silently, relentlessly, until people stop questioning your presence and start bracing for your decisions. You don't chase power. You become the gravity it orbits around. And it begins with restraint. Most men never get there. They're too desperate to be liked, too hungry for validation, too quick to perform. But the men who become forces of nature, they don't perform. They radiate. They don't need to say, "Respect me," because their actions make disrespect impossible. They don't need to say, "Listen to me," because when they speak, the room quiets itself. You can feel this shift in powerful people. They don't just move with confidence. They move with certainty. No wasted words. No scattered intentions. Just aligned execution. And over time, that becomes law. Not written law. Not spoken law. But psychological law, where people don't even think to question you. Because somewhere along the line, they learned, you always deliver. When Machiavelli wrote The Prince, he didn't glorify morality. He didn't worship likability. He worshipped results. He said, "It is better to be feared than loved." If you cannot be both, why? Because fear creates predictable obedience. Love creates conditional loyalty, and nothing makes people obey faster than the fear of uncertainty mixed with the memory of your impact. You don't need to explain. You need to execute. And then, disappear. Let the outcome walk into the room before you do. Let your silence ring louder than the voices still trying to prove themselves. Let your actions become unanswerable. That's what inevitability looks like. When others no longer ask, "What is he doing?" They ask, "What do we do now that he's done it?" That's not influence. That's dominion. And you only build it through consistency. Not noise. Not visibility. Just relentless. Silent. Strategic execution. Again, and again, and again. Until no one remembers your reasons. They just remember what changed because of you. The strongest power isn't declared. It's assumed. Because you've trained the world to expect movement every time you show up. Think of it like the tide. The tide doesn't ask permission to rise. It just does, and entire coasts reshape themselves in its rhythm. Be the tide. Let them brace for your next wave. If they still need to be convinced, you haven't moved with enough consequence yet. So speak less. Deliver more. Let them guess what you're planning while you're already executing it. Let your silence become prophecy. Let your presence become law. Let them adjust. Comment below. I don't ask to be followed. I move, and they adjust. And if you're not here to make noise, but to become unavoidable, subscribe now. This is not about growing louder. It's about growing so precise, so undeniable, so aligned with consequence, that resistance becomes useless. Because when your presence shifts the room before you speak, you've already won. They won't remember your arguments. They'll remember how they changed when you walked away. Not because you raised your voice, but because you raised the standard. You weren't there to be heard. You were there to shift the silence. That's the truth no one teaches you. Not in school, not at work, not even in love. You were told to explain, to justify, to open up so people would approve. But power doesn't work that way, because in the world of real consequence, people don't care why you did it. They only care what happened when you did. Caesar didn't leave footnotes. Napoleon didn't issue disclaimers. Steve Jobs didn't poll the audience. They acted and let history adjust. They were misunderstood, feared, even hated, but never forgotten. Because they didn't perform power, they became it. And so can you. So ask yourself, what legacy are you building? One of over-communication, of well-worded pleas, or of movements so precise, the silence around them still echoes? You don't need to explain anymore. You need to move, to act, to decide, and let the aftermath prove your presence. Because real presence doesn't ask to be felt. It bends the atmosphere without sound. And if this message spoke to something deeper in you, comment below, I lead through consequence. And if you've supported this mission through a super thank, know this, you didn't just help fund a video. You helped fortify a standard. A space where we don't play by the algorithm, where quality is king, where silence has weight. From all of us building this channel, thank you. You gave this voice more edge, more reach, and more reason to go deeper, bolder, sharper. We'll continue delivering the highest quality content we can create, not to entertain, but to awaken. So subscribe if you haven't. Not for us, but for the man you're becoming. Because power is not explained, it is remembered. And now, so will you.